Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to start getting settled in, get your drink. We're going to kick off in the next few seconds, or maybe at the end of this sentence, if I can draw it out. Cool. Okay, I'm just going to start. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We have seats up front, so if you want to sit, I'm not scary, I promise. And we're going to be kind and gracious. Amazing, that worked. Okay, so hi, everyone. I'm Sam Sabin. I'm the cybersecurity reporter here at Axios. Thank you so much for being here. I know how hectic an RSA schedule can be, and there are so many competing events, and I promise you chose the best one happening right now, I think. So we're so thankful for you all to be here. The run of show for today, we're going to have some amazing conversations here with Brandon Wales, who is awkwardly sitting next to me as I introduce him, and our private sector guests from Avanti. And this is all thanks to our sponsors here at AppBay. Thank you so much. If you see them, give them a high five. Appreciate them. And there'll be two short convos. We'll have another right there in the middle. And then I promise you'll get back to drinking and conversing and networking. But yeah, we're excited to dive in. Brandon, thank you so much for being here.
No, thanks, Sam.
Of course. So I guess maybe to start, as always, CISA comes out in full force to RSA. I think you're here, Jen's here, Eric's here. I'm missing a bunch of other people off the top of my head. Maybe as much as you're able to share, I'm curious to hear a little bit about what your week is looking like, if you have plans to meet with private sector, if there are specific initiatives that you're planning to highlight, focus on, things like that.
Sure. So, it goes without saying that CISA loves spending time with several thousand of its closest friends and partners, but I think it goes to the fact that our agency was purpose-built to be different, and that is to be a real partner for industry in the government. And this is one way in which we make that a reality. It is by building those close ties and making them meaningful. And so we have used RSA year after year to further mature our relationships with key partners in the technology space, in the financial space, and elsewhere, but also to highlight key programs and the places where industry can work with us. And I think one of the ones that we're going to be doing most aggressively during the course of this week is the evolution of the work we're doing to make technology more secure by design. This will be coming out in more detail tomorrow, a pledge with some of the largest companies in the technology space for them to identify a roadmap to make their technology more secure by design, more secure by default, more secure in deployment, and to make that commitment to their customers, which we think is immensely powerful, because the technology companies in the United States power the global economy, they power the entire technology ecosystem around the world, and that comes with it a special responsibility. To make technology that really is in the interest and secure for their customers, and the fact that they're willing to make that commitment publicly alongside us, I think should speak volumes to the real impact that we're having and that these technology companies want to have on the security of the global cyber ecosystem.
Totally, and I think I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the pledge and more specifically the significance of it, right? I think when the Secure by Design principles came out, about a year ago now, time is a blur, I think there were a lot of questions about how CISA, who is famously not a regulator, except for Cercia, we'll get there, it's not a regulator. It is very much based off of public-private partnerships, building trust, and then rolling out Secure by Design principles and going, actually, this is what we need from the community. I'm curious I think there was a lot of questions about how these were going to be enforced, what they mean, if people can get in trouble for not following them. So can you walk me through maybe what role the pledge plays in kind of taking Secure by Design to the next step and what it,
Yeah, I really think that the pledge is the culmination of the last year and a half of work. So you're right, we put out the initial set of principles a little more than a year ago. And and we got a lot of feedback on those. And actually, I think we used a session with a number of private sector partners at last year's RSA to gather feedback. And a lot of the feedback was, this is not specific enough. It doesn't really help us engineer to the right solutions. And we've taken that feedback on. We've produced additional information, additional products over the past year in our suite of tools, talking about secure by design that directly address the concerns raised by industry. And I think each iteration it has gotten better, it has gotten more detailed to provide further guidance for engineering and product teams to look at and say, what are we striving for? The pledge is a recognition that secure by design has kind of entered the ethos of these companies, and that it's no longer just the US government asking them to build products that are secure by design. It is a recognition across the board that the vulnerabilities in our technology are enabling attackers to have their way with US infrastructure, with small and medium-sized businesses, with local communities, and that we can't play whack-a-mole addressing 18,000 new vulnerabilities a year, one at a time, and every company by company, and that we need to deal with this more systemically. And the fact that you have leadership from these companies to say, we agree, and we want to do things differently, here's our commitment publicly, and here is how we're going to do that. Every one of those companies is making a commitment to demonstrate and show what their roadmap to success looks like. We can't tell you what that is for every single one of those companies. They need to look at their own engineering practices, their own products, whether they operate on-prem, in the cloud, as a service, and make decisions about how they're going to make those products more secure for their customers. And that's what the pledge does, and I think it'll have tremendous impact on the community.
Totally. And I know you just said more details were coming either tomorrow or Wednesday, but I'm still going to ask for them. I don't know if...
I don't want to steal everyone's thunder. It's not my announcement, but I think there'll be some details that start emerging tomorrow, but the main pledge will be happening on Wednesday that Director Easterly will be rolling out. So stay tuned.
Okay. And I'll switch gears politely. But I know you just came back from a trip overseas to, I guess, the Asian Pacific region. And there's no doubt that China is such a huge threat. It has become quickly what feels like the number one cyber adversary that we are facing. Volt Typhoon is like one of the hot topics next to AI that I hear in almost every conversation these days. Can you talk a little bit about maybe putting secure by design and the importance of it into context, right, of the China threat, right? Why it is that, yeah, how...
I think that's fantastic, because I actually was going to go there anyway. So the Chinese threat absolutely is the one that is keeping us awake every night. I think day to day, most companies are most concerned about cyber criminals, because they're the ones on a daily basis that are exploiting companies and exploiting small businesses and local communities. But the one that is driving action at the government level, because of the concern that they're looking to make systemic harm, to cause systemic harm to this country, to preposition only for attack and destruction. And the scale of China's cyber attack capability is so immense and growing that it has to be front of mind for us. And the connection back to secure by design is that if we look at Volt Typhoon activity that we have discovered over the past 18 months, when we've gone on site and found Chinese cyber activity, found them prepositioned in US critical infrastructure, in every single case, they got in through a vulnerable edge device on those networks. Those vulnerabilities in edge devices enabled China to get inside those networks. Upstream, the obfuscation network that they are operating that allows them to hide and get into those networks is through compromising vulnerable small and home office routers. So when we talk about secure by design, it is not, it is at every stage, in part because that is what they're looking for. And I would say there was a huge pivot point during the pandemic as everyone moved remotely. We saw in both action and intelligence that there was immediately a pivot to say, how are we going to exploit this moment and the changes that it incurred in how businesses operate across the country and around the world? And the spike from there that has not slowed in targeting of edge devices, whether it's routers and gateways and firewalls and other types of appliances, that is the way in which they're getting into US critical infrastructure. So if we want to make a measurable impact, if we want to make it harder for the Chinese to be ready to disrupt or destroy US critical infrastructure, it starts by making those products harder to attack, making them easier to secure, and making it easier for our critical infrastructure to secure themselves.
Totally, and I know you were just kind of touching on it maybe in the question before, but with this really fun existential threat that we've now started diving into, I'm curious if there needs to be some sort of change in how the federal government approaches critical infrastructure security, right? I don't want to undermine the successes that the Biden administration has had in the last 3-4 years or so now, especially since Colonial Pipeline. But it does feel like this is all work that moves very slowly. I know it's the government, but it's going sector by sector. It's moving slowly, and yet every day it feels like I'm hearing a new headline that's like, oh, another actor got into a water system by using password 1111. And I don't know if that means that we need to change how we regulate, if we need to be more aggressive in DC, or what that kind of signals to you.
This is a struggle. I mean, the United States does not have a heavy regulatory approach to cyber. That obviously runs in contrast with a number of our international partners. The EU has a much stronger regulatory program. The other partners and allies like Australia similarly have moved in that direction. If you look at the national cyber strategy, it had a number of major policy pivots and what it called for. One was kind of moving the burden of cybersecurity to those who are best able to handle it. And I think the work that we're doing around Secure by Design is really emblematic of that type of shift and what we want, because we think moving that upstream to the producers will enable, enhancing security at scale that we can't do one at a time. That being said, the National Cyber Strategy clearly identifies that there is limits to what we can do in a voluntary approach. And that we should have baseline cybersecurity standards across US critical infrastructure. I don't think that that's politically feasible in the short term, and so you are seeing the government try to use every other tool that we have to chip away at that, whether that's using regulatory authorities that we had previously had but not had used in cyber. So you'll see that in the case of the Transportation Security Administration's regulations for pipelines and rail and airlines and aviation. You'll see them try to use other approaches for other sectors. So trying to have EPA work with state regulators to improve the oversight of water authorities. And you'll see us continue to use the voluntary tools that we have at our disposal, our partnerships, our engagement, our services, our support, to try to drive progress there. You're right. It's, it may not be enough, but we're going to use every tool we have, and we're going to continue to push on Congress to say, more needs to be done here because we're not meeting the scale of the challenges that we currently face.
Absolutely, and I'm going to try and sneak in one last question about a topic that's super simple, CERCIA, which maybe is unfair to you, Brandon, but for those who don't know, and probably we're in a room with cyber people, so if you don't know, it's a problem probably, but it's obviously CISA is undergoing the proposed rulemaking process for the cyber incident reporting rule for critical infrastructure. There was a hearing on the Hill, I want to say last week on the House side, mostly with companies that were responding to the initial proposed draft. I think that was just released last month, so I know it's early days, but I'm curious about the initial feedback CISA's gotten, if there are any major sticking points that you foresee CISA having to wrestle with and things like that.
Sure, it's a great question. And for those who want more information, I'm doing a whole panel about this tomorrow with folks from the Hill and industry, so it could be lively. I'll be relatively short here. We put out a proposed rule for that exact reason. It is proposed, and we are looking for feedback. We don't pretend that we have all the answers and that we got it right when we drafted our proposal. It is based upon a lot of history and our understanding about reporting that we received currently from both the federal government and from industry. It is based upon listening sessions we hosted around the country and feedback we received about 18 months ago. But we want more feedback. We want to make sure that when we release the final rule next year, that it is used as a catalyst to drive the kind of reporting that will enable us to achieve the goals that we set out for ourselves. And that is spotting campaigns earlier, being able to determine whether cyber policy changes are having the kind of impact in the community that we want. that we can render assistance more quickly, that we're spotting novel tactics and techniques on adversaries and getting those out to the broader community. Again, for us, even CERCIA, although it's a regulatory program, it is not a regulatory program designed to hold people accountable for what happened to them. It is designed to use what happened to them to help everyone else in the community. And I think people need to think about it through that lens when they're providing comment, but please provide your feedback. We not only want to, but have to respond to that feedback in the final rule, and we are early days, but we don't have a lot of really detailed formal feedback yet. Many of the companies and trade associations are busy working away at their on their feedback now, but we are looking forward to it. We really think that is a key part of the process, not only get to a final rule, but get to a stronger, more successful final rule.
Awesome. Well, on that note, Brandon, thank you so much for taking time to be
Sam.
with us.
Thanks, Sam. It's great.
And thank you. And then we will have a short convo with our publisher, Nick Johnston, who's amazing, and our partners at Bay here. And then please stick around. We have one last conversation to close us out. But thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Good evening, everyone. I'm Nicholas Johnston. I'm the publisher of Axios. What I love about our events is they really become the physical manifestation of our journalism. It's so great to see so many folks who sign up for Sam's newsletter, who read Axios' other newsletters, hopefully read Axios San Francisco if you're local or any one of our cities, 30 of them across the country. And so it's really great to see all of you here. I'm really grateful for you being here. I'm, of course, also very grateful for our partners who make all of that happen, especially, of course, for tonight, to At Bay, who's been doing this with us for a year. How grateful am I for At Bay support? I've got my At Bay socks on, which are actually pretty awesome. I was putting them on this morning, and I'm like, this is a good pair of corporate socks. So not just for cybersecurity solutions, also great for footwear. And so on that note, I'm happy to welcome to the stage At Bay's CEO and old friend of Axios, Rotem Miran. Rotem, great to see you again. And you've got your At Bay socks.
Yeah, I got my own version.
I'm glad we didn't wear the same kind. Let's start sort of big picture. We talked last in January at Davos about the importance for small and medium-sized businesses to have a stronger cybersecurity strategy. That's speaking to kind of a highfalutin audience. I think here we're with the real crowd. So tell me the message you're bringing here to RSA about the importance of that.
Well, it's rather simple, actually. SMBs account for 70% of GDP. It's 70% of all jobs in America. It's 90% of all businesses. And there is a real market failure when it comes to security in SMBs. They are being left behind. We know this because this is the people that we insure and that we try to support. And the reality is that they have no budget for security and they have no expertise. And so they're not buying modern security. Less than 7% of businesses, this is a good stat because I think it just shows it's a real case in point. Less than 7% of SMBs have an EDR. EDR is, I think, is the one thing that maybe all of us can agree on is a good security product that you should have probably matured to about a decade ago.
The baseline expectation you should have, right?
And they don't have it not only because it's expensive, but because it is difficult to manage. If I gifted you an airplane, if you don't have a pilot's license, you're not going to be able to use it. And that's the situation we have with SMBs.
So then why should this room care? I mean, if these are mostly larger companies, I mean, who are the folks that you're meeting with around here? How do you push them to be like, keep this on your radar?
Well, the reason why SMBs are struggling is because they're struggling to keep up with good security. But I think what is even more important is that we've created a Wild West where they are basically fending for themselves against organized criminal groups from all over the world with really very little help from their government, who's busy with bigger jobs like fending off critical infrastructure from the Chinese government. I don't argue that should be their priority, but they're on their own. And I think that what is difficult here is, when we talk about security, we tend to focus the conversation on, okay, what security products and configurations do you have in place, and maybe let's talk about the bad guys. But what we often forget is that, well, your house is full of holes. Your walls are made out of paper. The IT that you buy keeps breaking. It keeps failing. And today technology is basically use at your own risk, even though these are trillion-dollar companies who are monopolies in their own spaces. And there needs to be more, I think, more accountability. And I really loved what we've been seeing from CISA in the last couple of years. This idea that these tech vendors should take more accountability and responsibility over creating tech that breaks less often.
Is this a little bit of an awareness thing here, where perhaps the community looks more at the bigger picture, the big threat, the big company, the foreign state actor, as opposed to the, like you said, the thousands of businesses that are smaller and really not paying attention to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to pay attention to SMBs because they don't have any money to pay, so they can't pay you. So industry doesn't focus on them. They don't have a large voice, and so they end up being left behind. And that's to us feels like a big and an important opportunity.
How do you bring this into the real world? Where specifically are these gaps that maybe smaller and medium-sized businesses are really experiencing challenges?
Yeah, and that's what's been frustrating for me as somebody who's been in security for a while, is that the security is infinitely complex, as we all love to delve in all the details. But at the end of the day, most of the attacks are very predictable. Attackers go after the same things. If you have a city that has walls around it, you're going to go after the gate. Right? Because the gate is a weaker point than the actual wall. And so what we're seeing is over and over again, attackers are going after the entry points into the network, typically remote access. And definitely with COVID and moving to work from home, those remote access points have only become more and more important. Historically, it's been one group of products, especially Microsoft's remote desktop protocol that over the last 5 years maybe caused or was the initial entry vector in more than half of all ransomware in America. This has changed this year. We've seen, and this is a report we're going to be publishing next week, but we've seen that, again, 59% of all ransomware is coming through these remote access points, and the group that is causing most, or that is most of the attacks are coming from, are these VPNs.
I mean, is there an optimistic angle of this? Is it possibly easier to solve because you kind of know the threat environment? It's not crazy newfangled types of attacks. It's relatively standard stuff that can be dealt with. So it is really just an awareness thing about getting these companies to get the support and to pay attention to it.
Well, it's to me, I mean, it's not just awareness. You need, I think if you are in the remote access business, then you definitely need, and I think that the remote access companies know this, you are being attacked, you are being targeted by attackers. Attackers don't only break into remote access devices, they also walk in through the front door with credentials they stole, because the way that users use their credentials is not secure enough. So we're talking about user identification and management of your user base. Those are not incredibly complicated. I would argue that if we were to focus on those areas where attackers spend most of their time attacking.
Like solve the basics. It's not some crazy thing with lasers and people dropping in through skylights. It's relatively basic attacks.
It's relatively basic, but what is hard about it is that you got to get to businesses that don't have a good understanding of security, that don't have a lot of even just mind space for it. But I think the equation is pretty simple. The attackers are in this for money. If we can make this more expensive for them, then they would have less of an incentive to attack. And so on an average ransomware, even though the costs include a bunch of different things you have to pay for, you end up on average paying the attacker about $280,000. The small business, if they're under 25 million in revenue, they pay on average $190,000. Let's make it expensive so that they don't go after those targets. If it's too expensive to go after small companies, they'll go after the large companies. And I think that is a responsibility that we have, and we can do that by just, if we can take away the easy stuff, if we can take away the mundane issues, we're not going to solve everything, but we're just going to increase the hurdle rate. We'll see attackers gravitate elsewhere.
How can this crowd help? We've got folks from the private sector, we've got folks from government agencies, government officials here. What should they walk out of this room thinking about to be a helpful solution to this problem?
I think what we're saying is let's not try to solve everything. Let's focus on the core issues that keep repeating. Let's increase the let's have a conversation about those areas, and specifically remote access to me is one area where we've just seen these attacks come in, and let's make it harder to attack. Let's make the vendors more accountable, and let's put a little bit of heat on the attackers so that we just have less of these attacks. This is with AdBay we're handling we have 200 claims a month at this point, and it's very frustrating how mundane, benign, and just predictable those attacks
Makes
are.
it feel like a solvable problem in your mind.
A lot of it is. I mean, not all of it, but we don't need to fix. We're never going to be able to get this risk to completely go away. But I think we need to bring it back to a level where an organization doesn't need to think twice about adopting technology, because to me, that's the risk, right? If technology starts to add more risk than value, then I think it's going to be detrimental.
So we love to wrap up at Axios on one fun thing. I hate doing fun things, future things with you because they're so depressing. What kind of fun future prediction do you have? Is it possibly a good thing, or are you just going to scare me about stuff?
Well, it'll be a securities person idea of fun, maybe, but it is unfortunately all we have is bad news in this industry. But I will say this, and maybe to paint it in like very vivid colors, I think it is very realistic that very soon finance people in every company will need to be able to tell if their CEO on a Zoom call is actually their CEO. That is coming, and it's coming very quickly.
What are you doing? Like, come on. Another cheery farewell from our friends at Bay. That's just the rise of deepfakes.
Yes.
Then they're going to get so serious that you wouldn't have any idea.
We're already seeing it in the lab. We're seeing a few evidence in the field already. The reality is that fraud is going to become a lot better and a lot cheaper and easier. And again, attackers go to where it is easiest and most predictable to get paid. And fraud, if you can get a finance person to wire $1 million into a bank account, that's a lot easier than a ransom demand and encryption and data privacy.
Yeah.
And I think that is coming, and it's coming fast, and it's going to be a wild time.
Well, thanks for letting us in on that note. Rodam, great to see you again. Thanks to @Bay for making this conversation possible. Thanks to @Bay for these great socks. Stick around. We got a big wrap up with my colleague Kia.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Very graceful transition.
That's right.
Oh, sorry, short person problems. All right. So for our last conversation, we're going to keep the small and medium business party going with our friend Shri Mukamala from Ivanti. You are Chief Product Officer. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
for
for
being
having
here.
me.
So let's. Sorry, you guys. Okay. So tell me, what are the biggest cyber threats right now facing SMBs, if you had to pick?
See, I think we touched on remote access services, right? That's a real problem. And one of the biggest things is it's not one threat. What we have done as an industry is we keep talking about exploits, and we came down to vulnerabilities. In my view, that's too late. You heard from CISA talk about secure by design. The challenge we have is it's a cultural problem. As we continue to introduce weaknesses, there will be vulnerabilities and people will take advantage of it. For SMBs, the problem is they don't have the sophistication to understand real threats. So we have to industrialize cybersecurity so that they don't have to worry about what a threat is. The biggest challenge is remote access services and the basics of what you need to build a resilient network.
So what can they do? What should they be doing?
So this is a very good thing. I mean, one of the advices I tell SMBs is partner with a very good cybersecurity service provider. You cannot hire the team, you cannot retain the team, you can't procure the tech. Even if you do, you can't do it. There are two things that are very important. Quantify your risk, right? I'm not just saying because I'm at Bay. You want to have a risk transfer program. Small businesses, like insurance, right? Why does everybody buy insurance? There's a reason for that. SMBs have to take insurance very seriously. That's one thing, to protect themselves. The second piece is it's very hard to build talent internally, not to build tools internally. So partner with the right companies to ensure you have the talent and you have the services that will make you resilient. Focus on your business, not worry about security too much.
Do you have any quick tips on how they should be selecting for their cybersecurity providers or vendors or teammates or partners?
Just by one. No, I mean, not that. It's a very good question, right? I mean, there is all spectrums of partners. You have national partners, you have local partners. Again, that's another big curse with cybersecurity. It is so fragmented, it's so distributed, it is so hard to pick who is a good vendor for you. So in cyber, 80% of this is horizontal because it's the same operating systems, it's the same software. Very little you do verticalization, specialized software. So depending on your sector, what you're doing, and what you're trying to be, you want to pick the vendor that's good in your vertical, right? If you're vertical focused. And if you're just routine, standard business, it doesn't really matter. Whoever gets you the best value, not a transaction, but a partner. You want to look for good partners.
So last week when we were chatting, you mentioned that you have been really concerned about the number of automated attacks in the last couple of years on SMBs. Is that because you just don't think that these small organizations are, equipped to deal with that, or is there a bigger concern?
So there are two things that are going on. Attackers are industrializing cybersecurity. There's no doubt about it, right? They're automating it, they're instrumenting it, they're sharing knowledge. They're in this together. Whereas as an industry, we're not. We compete. At the same time, when I say we, at the top, we're competing, we don't even share. When it starts getting down the food spectrum, there's very little to share, right? I mean, you touched on CISA being that epicenter to share knowledge to really bring everybody up to the spectrum. Most SMBs are not resourced. They just don't have the resources. Even if they want to, if you give them the information, they don't know what to do with it. So they're always at a disadvantage. And then without instrumentation and automation, which they're not capable of nor have access to, it is very hard to fight this coordinated fight.
Where is that rise in automated attacks coming from?
It's all over the map, right? It's coming from nation states to, the best example I always go back to Anonymous. We all freaked out when Anonymous first came, but when you started peeling the onion, Anonymous was nothing but, it's an ideology. It's like Arab Springs. Is there one nation that's doing Arab Springs? No, it is the faith that got all these little communities together, right? Now you're seeing that on university campuses. The same thing with cyber, it's coming all over. And the best part is like how we have open source software for us, we have free cyber tools. We call it a true asymmetric threat. All I need is a free Wi-Fi, which is plenty all over the world, a free access to compute, which is my mobile phone, and a Google browser, and I can launch an attack today and take down a real organization. So to me, that's my investment to earn millions of dollars or to take down a critical infrastructure.
Is there a role for regulation here in helping SMBs going forward?
So again, regulation has to come. I know I'll speak on the two-turn because I'm fortunate enough to advise several leaders in this country and elsewhere. And the country was patient enough, US was patient enough to let people self-police, be volunteer, be the right citizens, do the right thing. Unfortunately, the right thing is not happening fast enough, right? Those are some of the questions you heard from Brennan Wells as well. We have to regulate, and I don't think the lawmakers are going to sit down and watch this become another disaster. If I have to predict something after this election, you'll see some interesting movements happening here.
Do you have like a wish list of what US regulators should be doing?
Definitely, we both chat about it, right? So I think for the first time, they're talking about inequality. In this country, we always talk about fairness. I heard nobody left behind. I love Bush administrations. President Bush always talked about no child left behind. That was the greatest initiative to compete against China and India with our children here. I think when it comes to technology, especially AI and cybersecurity, no company should be left behind. And it is absolutely up to our regulators to make technology affordable and accessible.
Thank you for bringing up AI. Let's dig a bit more into AI. What are you seeing in terms of how it's creating more cybersecurity threats or more issues or harder issues? And then at the same time, tell me, how do you think it might be helpful?
So there are a couple of things. It's always synonymous, right? What does AI feed? Data. You feed data into AI. What are you trying to secure? Data, right? And when you start looking at AI, what it's really doing is AI is not creative. Let's all be very clear on that front. It is not going to come up with a novel attack. What it does is, if you take 80 hours to triage to launch an attack for 5 minutes, those 80 hours are going to be 8 nanoseconds. The rate at which, the scale at which you're going to do attacks is going to be fast. It's going to have a variety of things. And if you're anywhere close to signature-based or anomaly-based, what most security companies are, we're not going to even fight it. There are fancy terms like metamorphic and polymorphic, right? When malware changes its forms. Today, we can't even detect simple changes, let alone complex malware. So AI is going to play a big role from an attacker's perspective, and also from a defense perspective, we can actually accelerate AI to do the triage pieces where the humans spend time on novelty, and two important things, chaos and casuality. These are two different models where humans can focus on, where AI can do everything else.
Interesting. So you're saying that AI is going to just take threats to a whole new scale of efficiency, but we can also use that to our advantage.
Absolutely, it's already taking, right? So today, if you look at the rate at which the attacks are happening, what used to be a dwell time is down to minutes. What used to be a time to live of an attack has shrunk. And you also heard from Brendan, there's no way we're going to go look at 18,000 vulnerabilities every year, right? If it's 18,000, next year it's going to be 24,000. So that's why CISA is talking about classes of vulnerabilities, classes of weaknesses, right? And then through automation, you can really defend yourself. Come to a taxonomy and have your machines look for it. From an attacker's perspective, that's exactly what they're already doing. Rather than looking at 50 things, they will find one vulnerability, the density across. If you run a simple showdown, it will tell you 40,000 VPNs are vulnerable on this 18,000 water systems in the world. Okay, now I had one click, I take down 18,000 water systems. I'm not going to go pick, oh, I want to go to this little town, Socorro, New Mexico, take down that city, go to an X city to an X city, right? So you can automate a lot of your stuff by just looking at what your simple searches would do.
Is there anything in the AI in cybersecurity world that you're just like, this is BS, this is nonsense, this is AI washing?
So AI is not the cure. I mean, I'll tell everybody that. Again, thanks for you all. I was a beneficiary of your taxpayer dollars. I was President Clinton's White House-funded cybersecurity AI PhD in 2000, right? When nobody even knew how to spell AI. So thank you all for that first. So what is the problem with AI is there is so much fanfare around it. AI is going to be the cure. AI is going to solve all our global problems. The problem is a lot of us are still trying to figure out what can AI do and what it cannot. So there's definitely a clear definition that needs to come in. But if you ask me from an industry perspective and an academic perspective, the safety of AI is real. If we don't pay attention, and if we start bringing decision intelligence, decision making closer to the machine, we have to be careful, right? That's why when you look at autonomous vehicles, you still have a human holding the steering. You don't let the planes fly yet. You have the pilot still watching it, right? But 90% of the flying is done by automation today. So we are almost there, but we have to pay attention to safety. We have to pay attention to what we call zero detect software. So pretty much you cannot afford a defect. And that's where we need to get to. Unfortunately, software vendors are not there yet. And that's what we should be looking at when we're bringing AI at scale.
So my last question, a year from now, if we were to be right back here having another amazing conversation, what do you predict is going to be like the hot topic that all of these professionals are going to be whispering about over wine all week?
I think AI bill will be passed, and we all will be talking about we have AI legislation. No, man, I think jokes aside, right? I mean, the country will pass AI legislation, and then the draft is balanced when you compare with the EU to what US is going to do. But the reality of the matter is, we will come back and talk about how real AI was from a defense perspective, and we'll also start talking about the real AI offensive cases. But right now, it's a lot of theory, it's a lot of hearsay, he said, she said. Now we'll actually start seeing some real evidence of AI being used at scale, both on the offensive side and the defensive side.
All right, AI Chatter 2.0. We'll check in next year. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you
Stick
all.
around. We're still going to be drinking and eating until 6:30. And then also, if anyone's interested in an upcoming event in San Francisco, BFD, all about deal making, find myself or anyone else from the Axios team, and we'll tell you more about it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.